Welcome to Funnel Reboot, the podcast that shares ideas on how to upgrade your lead generation. Here is your host, Glenn Schmeltzley.
Hey, Glenn here. Welcome to Funnel Reboot, where we learn how to upgrade our lead generation. If you haven't caught some of our recent episodes, which include one on data wrangling using new tools, or how marketers could think of philosophy, giving them a creed for how they do their work, you can go and check those out. Today's episode deals with the full marketing stack. But I'd first like to ask if you have an idea for a future show or someone that I should have on, please give some feedback. I'd love to hear from you on social at Funnel Reboot, or you can leave a comment on our listener feedback line at 613-703-7073. On to today's topic. The element of marketing that occupies, I think, the largest chunk of our time and energy is the collection of software tools that we use, usually termed our technology stack. Some people have seen enough done with these stacks that they can spot the do's and don'ts that marketers should follow. That is, if you want the technology working for you and not the other way around. I brought somebody on who I think is really good at this stuff. He's a front-end digital marketing strategist and designer, but he's also a backend developer who knows systems like JS, Jquery, Node.JS, Ruby, PHP. He can even do some hobby computer building in his spare time. But what he's equally good at is using the creative side of what he does to make sure that the tech stack that we use conforms to the marketing objective that our strategy calls for. I came to meet him through some of his community-minded pursuits, including his organization of live meetups for social media and marketing folks in Ottawa. Although his background involves a lot of travel, he did come home to settle in Ottawa, where he lives and works on cool projects as a freelance marketer, picking his projects and deciding where he wants to lend his creative talents. Please join me in welcoming Dave Hicks. Hey, welcome to the show, Dave Hicks.
Hey, Glenn, how's it going?
It's going all right, thank you. Dave, you and I have known each other for quite some time, and I know you to be a guy who has a lot of knowledge of all aspects of a marketing stack. And maybe you can just start us off. Just let's not mystify things. Let's get right down into what do you consider to be some of the main things that you need to have in a marketing stack? What does that mean to you when somebody throws that phrase out?
I think, again, I come to programming and sort of website development and design from a marketing background. So I worked in marketing for years and then sort of slowly moved over more into the technical side. And so I tend to look at technology problems as business problems. And, I think at a very basic level, if you're using technology for marketing, you need to bring people in the door. You need to give them something to do, and then you need to do something with that information that you've collected from them in order to drive the next process sort of in your sales funnel. And so I think if you've got those three pieces, you've sort of got the fundamentals that you need. And then, of course, it's just a matter of optimizing messaging and content and those sorts of things to get the better results.
Sweet. So it's called a stack for a reason. And to do each of those three things, I guess we can consider. You talked about having kind of a leaning into the technical side. So I know when I'm speaking with technical people, they refer to there being applications maybe that, your standard marketing user would interact with. But that's not the whole picture. That below the waterline, there is other stuff happening that's more of a service infrastructure nature. So this would be your file directories, your actual email, messaging, your website, your cart integration, things like this. And I guess we never see these things until something goes wrong. and then we see,
Yes.
some of even the biggest companies in the world have things go wrong with them. They get hacked, or an innocent mistake is made, and they go down. So I guess my question is, where do we have to? How do we avoid these threats? How do we minimize that things are going wrong for this whole dark part of the stack that most of us don't spend much time thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of complexity that can exist under the hood in a modern website or an app on your phone. And as you say, like we don't really think about that on a day-to-day basis, and all the things that have to work properly in order for you to place an order online or for you to click on something and to get some information. And that's a good thing in general. I think we've got to the point now from a technology perspective where a user who doesn't need to understand the technology to go in and do something online and accomplish their goal, whether it's they want to buy something or they want to get more information about a product. And overall, it's a good thing. But as you say, like when things go wrong, they can go really wrong. And I think part of that is just the nature of the web itself. There's lots of competing standards. There's lots of different technologies out there. Everyone's got their preferences in terms of what they want to use to build an application or what have you. And because of that, there's not a lot of uniformity across the web. And so each sort of organization is like a little silo. They've decided on their technologies and their tools that they want to use, and they've built around those. And when things go wrong, sometimes they're the only people who know how to fix it. And we've seen this in the past, just recently with Facebook. When they went offline, they very much built a system to their specifications that they wanted. They really ate their own dog food, to coin the old phrase. And then when things went wrong, they went horribly wrong. And I tend to, in my own practice, I like to use stuff that's as open as possible. That's relatively common. It may not be the sexiest, newest, sleekest platform, but a phrase I use quite often is like, if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, there's probably somebody else who can pick up where I left off. Because I'm not using something that's super arcane or weird. And I think there's probably some benefit in us moving back more into that direction of more open standards or more common kind of architectures, to get away from having to build everything from scratch. There's a lot of reinventing the wheel that happens, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it depends who you're asking, right? I mean, this is the classic situation of like a whole bunch of blindfolded people standing around, if we were to equate a marketing stack to that elephant, and, somebody's touching the trunk and they say, oh, it's a snake, and somebody grabs the tail and says it's a horse. Nobody's really seeing the whole thing. And what they see is part of what their previous influence has been, right?
Yeah, and I think a big part of the problem from technology nowadays is that as things have gotten more complicated and more powerful and sophisticated at the same time,
Yep.
is there's no one person who is the elephant wrangler. It
Yep.
requires an entire team of people, and so you'll have someone who's they give the elephant the manicures, and there's someone else who's responsible for washing the elephant, and there's someone else who does something else over here, and someone gives the elephant the peanuts, but there's no one person who sort of understands the elephant from trunk to tail. And
Yep.
that's why when things break, it can take a while to figure out what's going on. And again, to me, I feel like getting back to sort of go to the core fundamentals and try to simplify things wherever possible. And that can be difficult in a tech environment because engineers and software developers, they want to play with new stuff, and I get that. But maybe not doing that in your production environment, and don't be the first person to launch on a new platform necessarily. We have to sort of temper the shiny stuff with sort of the risk that comes along with that.
Okay, and I think that's a great point for, let's say, a marketing person who, let's say, they're graced with some budget to figure out something that they need to build in their stack. So, in your scenario, they're hearing maybe guys over on the dev side saying, we can custom code this, right? And that's true, it can be done. But that means that if one of them gets hit by a bus, there may be a difficulty in figuring out what they did. On the other hand, we probably have the shiny suited software suite salesperson who's saying, well, just buy our commercial off-the-shelf system, and it'll do everything
Yeah.
you need. There's I guess, a downside of that one too. What would the downside be of using one monolithic, suite to do all these things?
Well, I think the challenge always with like a pre-built tool, the benefit, of course, is like someone's already done it and they, put thousands of hours of work into something. Theoretically, it's supported, and there's probably some good examples of how it can be used, sort of in the wild. So that's all good stuff. The drawback there is that inevitably, and in my experience, every company sort of wants to customize things a little bit, and sometimes a lot. And then you get into additional complexity and risk trying to customize somebody else's platforms or tools. Either you have to pay them to do it, or you have to do it yourself, or you got some sort of janky hack that does the job. And so this goes back to what I was saying earlier. Is I think there's a lot of focus on sort of the technology and the whiz bang cool factor, and we can do this and we can do that, but sometimes it gets away from the core point of what are you trying to accomplish as a marketer, and focusing on the technology to get that done, and just basically the KISS principle, keep it simple, at least initially, and then you can always sort of add on to it as sort of success feeds into it. And I see that a lot with people where they start off, they want the Cadillac, and it's like, well, maybe just buy like a 10-year-old car, get it on the road and see how it
Yeah.
drives. And then, based on that success, you can go back and iterate, over the next little while. And that's the nice thing about the web is like, it can be very iterative. You're not nothing's carved in stone. Go back and iterate and refine and improve. And then, maybe in 6 months, you've got to sort of that initial point where you were, but you also got there knowing all the things that you learned in the 6 months of experience. And that may guide you in a slightly different direction. I find a lot of people get like paralyzed by overbuilding, at least initially.
Yeah.
And then they run into technical problems. Cost goes out of control. Everyone's upset because the product is delayed, and everyone's pointing fingers at each other. And said sometimes it's just the website you have is better than the website you want to build. And it said just focus on those iterations type thing. But there are lots of reasons, both internally and externally, why projects can go sideways that way. And I said I think for me, if you start getting into like heavy debates about platforms and technologies and stuff like that, maybe you need to go back and just refocus a little bit on the business goal, and use that to sort of, it's like an Occam's razor, just to cut through everything and get down to like the basic, most simple thing you can possibly do in that scenario. Launch it, iterate it, repeat, repeat, repeat.
Yeah. And I'll return to underline that one phrase you had used before, open standard. So I think the safety there, because it doesn't, impose a leaning towards either custom coding or off the shelf. If they meet an open standard, there's an API and something can talk to something else, or they do something in a way that the whole industry does it, then you are safer than if they'd done it in some weird forked way, right?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, like one of the problems with open standards is, I mean, first of all, often cases there isn't a standard that exists, but there are sort of standard methods of doing things, and there are different languages and technologies that are more commonplace than others. So maybe not open standard, but at least like a common standard or a common tool definitely makes things easier. So use an example, an actual real example is WordPress. WordPress, probably the most common CMS platform that's used to build websites that's out there in the market today. I think it's somewhere around 30-35% of the market. WordPress has lots of problems with it. I mean, it's not perfect by any stretch of imagination, but it's very common. And so there's, chances are if you run into a problem, somebody has run into a similar problem before, and you can probably find an answer for it. Whereas if you're using some weird sort of, super custom or, very niche CMS that, was, used by the person who developed it and their brother-in-law and you might not have the same success at getting things, sort of fixed or finding answers or finding someone else to work on it for you. So, going with that more common sort of tool might save you a lot of grief in the future. But you may be buying a bit of grief when you get into it. So, it balances out.
Yeah, none of them are perfect. And I guess we have to temper it again by, would an external user notice? Like, are you able to deliver that much better a consumer experience that is going to justify you using something that your brother-in-law, and a third person made? Not likely. It's more likely that other people have done, something pretty close to what you have in mind on a tool where, if there's a problem, an internet search will reveal the answer.
I mean, other than, people who did the development themselves, nobody really cares what technology your platform uses. They just want it to work.
Oh, you hurt me there, Dave.
pretty...
That's gonna really sting with some people here, but yeah, that point needs to be made.
No, I mean, like, an end user doesn't care if you're using Shopify or WordPress. They just want to click on a button. They want to buy a product. They want to check out, and they want it to happen smoothly and quickly, and they want the process to make sense. And so again, this gets back to, like, from a user experience, a UX kind of approach is the stack underneath doesn't really matter as long as it's providing that experience for the user, and it's working. And if at the same time your stack is helping your development team and your marketing people to create stuff in an easier fashion, that's great. That's wonderful. But, like, your user doesn't care if, like, it saved your development team a couple hours of work or a week of work. They don't care that it allows the marketing team to change their content quickly and easily. They just want to be able to buy the product and get on with their lives.
Right. Now, having said that, we as marketers have a fair bit of work on our hands, and sometimes dumped in our laps is, a project for getting a new email service provider, or getting a new marketing automation platform, or getting a new CMS. When it comes to these things, which do you favor? Should we try to nail all the tasks ahead of time and treat it in classic, Gantt chart project mode, or are you more agile, like, well, let's find problems and deal with them as they come up? Which side do you fall on?
I mean, it depends on the scenario. Just by nature of my own practice, I quite often get brought in at the end of projects after things have broken, and sort of have to fix them sort of at the last minute. So I don't often have the luxury of being able to make big high-level architecture decisions and, we're going to use this platform and do X, Y, and Z. It's often like, here's a smoldering pile of rubble. It's got to launch by next Monday. What can you do to get us back on track? And so this goes back to my initial sort of statement, which is like, keep it simple if you can, because, if you end up in a salvage situation, which is unfortunately quite common in a lot of web builds, it just takes that much longer for somebody external to get up to speed on things and, do what they need to do in order to help out in that regard. So, to me, like, in my practice, I tend to focus on WordPress and Shopify. Those are the two big platforms that I work with. And again, they both have their benefits and their drawbacks compared to other competing tools that are in the market. That said, they are very common. There's lots of, like, material and support and developers and tools available out there, and that makes my job easier, and therefore it makes my clients' jobs easier at the end of the day. And so that's what I stick with. And, I'll get in arguments with developers because they're like, oh, you should use X, Y, or Z. And it's like, yes, I don't disagree with you. It's just that, the fact of the matter is these are tools that are very commonplace in the market. Those are what I focused on. I can't do everything. And they allow me to do my job quickly and effectively. And therefore allows my clients to, receive some benefit from that efficiency as well.
I like what you said there. So the IT developer isn't wrong. It's always based on the context of when is something needed by, and how far off are we from, nominal operation. So if we're way off the rails, you just have to jump in and maybe do, some pretty severe surgery on things. While according to the textbook method, a developer would probably take, agile sprints and, surface these as stories and say, I want to fix them. But, there's a time and a place for everything. And that ain't the time and place for right, for doing the textbook stuff.
Yeah, there was back at the beginning of COVID. Um, there was a lot of people who were trying to shop on IKEA, and IKEA has, in my opinion, not the best online shopping experience. And they were just overwhelmed, and they were trying to obviously make changes and updates to improve the situation. Um, I can't remember exactly where I saw it. Maybe it was on Twitter, but someone had mentioned that, oh my God, you can actually see if you have the developer console open in your browser, you can actually see live evidence of a developer in there making changes and debugging things, on the live site, just trying to like patch it together. This is IKEA, like it's, um, and so like
Wow.
sometimes despite, and I'm sure that IKEA has processes and policies in place, but sometimes despite our best efforts, you just got to get down there in the mud and do it, and it's dirty and quick, and just to get things operating, and then you can go back and do a proper you know triage and fix on it once the sweat and pain is away. But that's
Right.
just how it works sometimes on the web. And
Okay.
so yeah, like there's lots of gradations.
Yeah. For the uninitiated, you're referring to what they call a production site. So, what would be the preferred way of doing it instead of just making your changes on a live production site?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you would be working. I mean, I'm sure IKEA has got multiple layers, but usually, you're going from a development environment into what's called a staging environment. And then you do all your final testing and validation, make sure it works properly. And the staging environment should be an exact replica of what you have in production so that you don't have any weird problems that pop up when you launch. And then you move that into production and everything works swimmingly. In the real world, it doesn't work. And then
Well,
just from a
so
marketing.
there's a you actually have got a whole meme going on Twitter with how it's done when it doesn't work. So, do you want to let anybody in on the inside joke that you and I normally get going on about, let's say, 2 o'clock on a Friday afternoon?
Deploy on Fridays. I mean, it's the classic example of, everything goes wrong and your weekend is ruined. And so,
Right.
in a perfect world, your deployments are scheduled at a time when you've got low traffic and, you have development resources and support people available to fix things in case something goes wrong. And of course, through various things that happen, it ends up, inevitably being at like late on a Friday before a long weekend or something like that. And somebody's weekend is ruined, or they're working till 3 o'clock in the morning to get things operationalized. So obviously, best case scenario, we would avoid those type of deployments, but in reality, it doesn't always happen that way. So we can try to sort of ascribe to best practices, but we also need to be flexible and accept that mistakes will happen.
Yeah, for sure. One of the big things that marketers are nerdy about with their systems is data. We're supposed to be getting data out of these systems so that they can inform us on what's working and how we can improve it. So this is, not going to lie, not the highest consideration on the part of people who are setting up a stack. But it normally comes along in the conversation. So, do you have any tips to maybe help marketers understand how they can, pre-think these things so that the output of these systems is going to give them data instead of them getting everything all wired up and running and then ask the question, so where's my data?
Yeah, so I mean, I think like the problem with data is there can be a lot of data, like unlimited amounts of data, and it can be extremely granular. And the problem there is that then you have too much data. And we've had this conversation before, Glenn, like actually with mutual clients, where I'm a big fan of keeping it relatively simple. And like if your dashboard's got more than maybe 10 KPIs that you're looking at on a regular basis, you probably have too much data. And it just clouds your decision making process. That said, it is nice to be able to drill down, based on say one of those 10 KPIs, say, oh, what's going on here? Something seems a little off, or this is working really well, but I want to understand why. And then being able to drill down like 2 or 3 or 4 levels into the actual, raw data. Maybe you're getting into logs, that sort of thing, and find out what's going on there. So I think that sort of multi-tiered approach, where like most of the time as a marketer, you're just sailing along and you're looking at the horizon for icebergs and those sorts of things. And then if you see an iceberg, obviously take the correct action, but understand too that, below the surface, there's a lot of extra data that is available there for you to take a look at. And I think from a technology perspective, the job from a developer is to, I think, anticipate, maybe some of those future requests for that deeper dive into data, and to at least have, put the pipes in place, or you're collecting that data. It may not exist in a report, but the data is being collected in a database. It's relatively cheap and easy to do there. And then, 6 months, a year down the road, hey, we want to be able to look at this type of thing and slice the data this way. You say, oh, good thing we have all that data in place already, and we've got a year's worth of it. We can actually produce a nice, robust report now and take the time and effort to do it. So I think it's a mix. It's like, keep it simple and at the surface, and then also have the depth available to people when it is required.
Couldn't agree more. I think if we're going to consider that the non-technical and the technical people are going to meet halfway, it's that each of them has to understand what it requires. So from a marketer to understand what the dev has on their plate, if they are going to gather more data, that's more work. And, there's a trade-off, right? And there's got to be a margin, an outer boundary placed on it, because as you say, if you tried to gather everything, it would, literally, probably bring the whole system to its knees.
Yeah, obviously. I mean, like there is a limit to how much data and how fine and, the time slices that you can have available. But this goes back to sort of my earlier point, which is if you're using sort of standard off-the-shelf tools, there's a pretty good chance that somebody else has already put the thought into, some of that data collection. So, all the main stuff is probably already covered. And maybe from a development perspective, you're only adding in, a dozen custom fields to sort of, keep people happy down the road. And, it depends, I guess, a bit on how much, it depends on the marketer you're working with. Some people are, very much just driven by results. Some people are very analytical. And I generally find that each of those, sort of personalities are going to come forward with their list of requirements. And then it's just a matter of having that discussion, understanding the requirements. Maybe there's a bit of horse trading that goes on. Say, well, I can give you these 6 things, but these other 5 things are going to take a little too long or cost you too much money. And so maybe just back off on it. And as I said earlier, like, these things can always be added later. And I find a lot of times it's like, there's a lot of, and especially coming from a situation, maybe they waited 2 years to get this sort of new form on the website because of just, other projects that were taking priority. So like when they get the opportunity to sit in the room with somebody who can actually build this thing for them, it's like they have this huge wish list. And then what happens is they're sort of their own worst enemy, because they take it from being a relatively small project to something much bigger, and then it just doesn't get done, or it takes a long time. There's a lot of extra complexity that happens, and it's like, well, let's just launch with like, the skinny version of the form, get it to work, get the technology sort of happy, and then we can sort of go back in a month's time or 2 months' time and add on a few more pieces, or maybe you learn something from that form. And I've seen this happen many times where it's like, oh, you know what, we really actually need to have this extra field because it will give us a lot of extra value for people who complete the form. And then that's from experience, and you just add that in at that time, and now the form is working great. And so there's a lot of temptation, I think, to sort of boil the ocean. Whereas I think people, if they just focus down on, what's the MVP, what's the minimum viable product here, figure that out, and then just add to it incrementally over time. I always find that sort of brings the best results. And I think it keeps people sort of, it's less stressful for the developers. I think it gives you velocity in terms of moving your marketing goals forward. So that's my preferred approach. Obviously not always possible, but if I can sort of suggest things to people, that's what I do suggest.
Yeah. And I would say for the marketers, one of the things, and I'm going to return to your kind of story about the ship and looking on the horizon, is try to think of how you would utilize the information. So, in that silly example, you're looking on the horizon and you're looking at a speck of something and you're saying, I'm not sure, is that an island or an iceberg? Is it moving or is it stationary?
It's a pirate ship.
Well, but What I would do, just to borrow from that, is I probably have a map sitting, on my bridge somewhere. So I'm going to go check the map. And this is where data collection, we kind of ask ourselves, okay, every map, everybody understands this. We've understood this since we were kids. Maps are scaled down versions of things, right? So a map doesn't keep to 100% fidelity everything that could be around me. It's not showing me where every molecule of water is. It's showing me, yeah, over in that area, there is a piece of land. Oh, okay. Well, good. Now I know what to do. And that's kind of the same thing if we look at how our systems are gathering data. For most purposes, let's say, we needed to see what happened last month. We might be getting something that's aggregating and giving us one number for the month, or maybe it's totaling together 30 days of one numbers. That's like a map. That's a shrunk down, scaled down version of what really happened. What really happened were a lot of log files and individual rows of data, but it gets aggregated, and that aggregated version of it is still good enough to use.
Well, and this actually goes to another point, which is what are you actually going to do with the data? And
Right.
I see this happen quite regular. I see this happen quite regularly where I'll use an example where, you set up, say, some marketing tools, so MailChimp for a user, and they've decided, okay, we want to break our customers into 6 different categories, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, based on various different things. And then we're going to provide them with like different landing pages and forms. We're going to collect all this information for them. And then, you come back and talk to them 6 months from now, and, you're in working on something and you discover that they've sent out, 3 generic email campaigns just to everybody. There was no specialization. There's no customization of messaging. There's no
Yeah.
difference in the content. And it's not to say that you can't do that later on, but it's like there was a lot of extra work put into setting this up. And at the end of the day, they're just using it as in this case, as a general newsletter. Just set it up as a general newsletter. We could have gotten in and out in, a tenth of the time, saved everybody a lot of planning and development work and money. I mean, don't get me wrong. I get paid for this stuff, so I'm happy to do it. But, I think going back, if I put on my marketing guy hat, it's like, well, how are you actually going to use this stuff? And, try to tailor the process and the tools you have for what you're actually going to do. And then you can always grow those tools and change them and add things to it at a later date.
Yeah.
And you've had the benefit of an entire 6 months of using just that generic simple form anyway. So you have now a list of 2 or 3 thousand people that you can go back and you can send them an email like, hey, we're in the process of trying to refine this. Can you just tell us what you're interested in? And then you can throw them into their separate lists, and then you start marketing to them as individuals in those lists. There's nothing wrong with that. And again, it goes back to just don't over-engineer the solution at the beginning. You can always sort of add to that down the road.
Couldn't agree more. There's even one more thing, and it's coming from the regulatory sphere that is helping us realize that, how long we retain this data and how much of it we gather is actually something that we're owning and responsible for. Privacy, right? GDPR, CCPA, these things, they are now tasking us, marketers, with saying, all right, do you really need that? Because if you don't really need that, either don't collect it, or if you do, have a regimen in place for getting rid of it, for forgetting it at the end of the story, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly a lot of that's come about because of the preponderance of spam that exists out there, and people just don't want junk mail and they don't want to be abused. I think most companies, have good intentions. They're not just trying to gather an email to spam you, but in terms of having data purges and stuff like that, the customer is going to do that for you anyway. People move positions, their emails change, they and so if you have a list, and I've seen this happen, we have a list of 200,000 people. It's like, well, do you really have 200,000 people? Maybe you've only got 60,000 real addresses on there that are even current, and you could actually market to. But that gets back to sort of a lot of times it's sort of like a vanity metric. It's like, we collected X number of email addresses, every month. And I've seen this happen before where, we had clients who we're receiving a fair amount of spam through their forms, and then you go and fix that because the salespeople are unhappy because they have all this spam that they got to wade through,
Yep.
Russian brides or penis pills, that sort of thing, and
Right.
you go and fix that, and now the sales department is upset because we don't get as many leads anymore. It's like, well, you went from 100 leads a day to 20, but they're actually 20 real leads, and then the marketing team is upset because like they have a metric somewhere that someone gets a bonus for based on how many people
Yep.
sign up for their mailing list. So so again, it's sort of tailor your metrics and the information that you're trying to collect to actually achieving your business goals. And that's sort of one of those cases where, you see a bit of a disconnect.
Yeah, I think that also comes to the people that are in charge that are maybe doling out the budget dollars to build the stack is try to pick metrics that aren't so easily gameable, right? So if you can make a metric where it takes, let's say, an outside person, like an NPS score, right? It has to be completed by the client or a person who's maybe had a chat interaction with you to ask them how pleasant was this experience. If you look at that kind of a metric, it's far harder for an internal person to say, all right, I know how to get this metric way up and get my bonus. That one, you really have to do the work in order for you to get the benefit.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, I'm a big fan of like the only real metric that counts in most cases is your sales. You
Yep,
put X amount of marketing dollars in, you throw a bunch of resources at this, and then at the end of the quarter, did sales go up or did they go down? Did they go sideways? That's really all that matters. You can't really cheat that either. I mean, unless you're
that's
Corel or
true.
something like that. the, the old stuff the channel trick. For those who've been in Ottawa for a while.
Right.
Anyway, I digress. The thing is like you can't really lie about your sales metrics. There's lots of other metrics that sort of can be manipulated or may provide
Yep.
you with like a false signal. And I find that if you focus too much on those things, you sort of get your eye off the prize. And again, I'm not to say that every single transaction that you have with a customer is going to result in a sale by no
Yeah.
means. In
Yeah.
many cases, you might have 5, 10, 15, 20 interactions with a client before they actually click the buy button. And sometimes they don't even click the buy button. They actually, get in their car and they drive to your store, or they buy it through a distributor, and you never really know 100% if that converted. We had conversations about the difficulty in doing cross-channel conversion tracking, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
Just, but that will show up on your bottom line. And, that's how things are working in an aggregate sense. In a micro sense, it's a little tougher to sort of say like, well, yeah, we launched this, and we put this new landing page out, and we have Google ads that are feeding into it, and we can track that. We got 1,000 people went to the page, and 200 people filled out the form, and then from that salespeople contacted them, and we had 10 actual concrete sales. That's great, but there's probably a lot of soft stuff around the edges that you'll just never really know sort of what happened for sure, but you can definitely imply it based on the fact that quarter Q1 we didn't have this form, Q2 we had this form, and sales went up by 10%. That's sort of in a perfect world, that should be enough to at least know that you're
Right.
heading in the right direction, and then it's about refinement and some of the other things we talked about.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way to temper what we were saying earlier about you still need to set stuff up to give data, but let's not imply there that that means that you will ever get 100% fidelity to what's actually happening. I think it was George Box who said, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And it's a model, right? You're trying to look at the
Yeah.
data to give you an idea of what's really going on.
Well, I'm always a big fan of like standard distribution curve,
Yep.
in terms of a population. Like, there's always going to be the weirdos on either end, but then most people kind of fall in the middle, and that's how they sort of act. And so, like, there'll be cases sometimes where you'll build a system to do something, and then someone will send an email. Oh, I tried to do this on your website, and it didn't work, or something was broken, and of course everyone gets panics. And then, sometimes I'll contact that person directly and say, hey, I'm the web developer. I built this thing. I want to understand what's going on here because I want this to work for as many people as possible. And then you find out that they're living in a Unabomber cabin up in the woods and they've got like a 50-year-old computer. And
Right.
I'm like,
Right. And they
okay,
just didn't see
so
the big button. Maybe their monitor doesn't have the contrast to show the big button that, now that I know that's there, I would do it the way that everybody else does it.
yeah, and so in that case, I contacted the customer and I absorbed information from them, and we decided that we can't change things to make things work for them. Sometimes it's just the best outcome for that situation. In any case, focus on the bulk of people, the 80-20 rule type of thing, and then you can, that way you're probably getting the most bang for your buck. And I think important here, and I probably should have mentioned this way back at the beginning, is when I'm talking about these things, I'm talking most of the time about small and medium-sized businesses. They might have one marketing person or a couple of salespeople, or maybe they don't have any marketing people at all. A lot of businesses are doing quite well that way, and they're using these tools to help them with it. But we're not talking about the Procter and Gambles of the world. Procter and Gamble probably has 50 people who just dig around in databases all day trying to find weird little bits of information. They have a different set of business problems than a small business, and they can get that granular. So when I talk hey, focus on your top level KPIs, I'm focusing more on sort of that small and medium sized business than say a giant business enterprise that has tons and tons of resources, just because that's going to get you the best value.
Yeah, no, the great point. And actually, that leads right into what I was going to ask you. There are different types of, technology stacks depending on your size of company. And most companies inevitably hit that point where either a large part of their stack has just grown too old, or what we hope actually has happened is that this growth that we were doing all of this for the sake of has materialized. But now the system is bursting at the seams. It can't scale beyond a certain point, and we have to buy something more robust. We have to provision for some more traffic. What advice do you give to people to, help them understand how to do this? And I guess the most important thing that I want to know is, can you do it so that you're just replacing the part of the stack that you need, and you're hopefully leaving other pieces intact so that we can do this slowly as a rollover? We don't have to think of it like a game of Jenga where we're pulling a piece out and the whole tower falls, and now we've got a massive job on our hands, and there's no business happening while it's all hands on deck.
Yeah, I mean, I think, going back to this idea of we have a suite of different tools. Most organizations, when they build out, their websites to accomplish something, they're probably using, they're using maybe a CMS or a web tool. They're using maybe something for e-commerce. They're using probably something for email. Maybe they're using something for CRM, type of thing. And, I think where we're at now is there's lots of different options. Most of those tools are fairly cheap and affordable for people, so you can go out and subscribe to Salesforce, and start using it today without outlaying thousands and thousands of dollars. And then 2 years from now you decide that we want a different CRM tool. You can just pull out that Salesforce API integration and put in your other tool, maybe HubSpot or something like that. And so because we sort of broken, I guess, the core functionality of a website down into maybe several different services or tools, swapping them out is a little bit less painful. But then you run into issues like, obviously customizations and things like that. And that's where it gets kind of thorny. And so, it's a challenge. This is not a one size fits all type solution, but it's very important. I think at that point in the process is everybody needs to sit down and figure out, okay, here's where we are, here's where we want to be. So that's our goal. And these are our pain points. And then, we got to do some evaluation. I'm using Salesforce sort of as an example, but what is it that Salesforce isn't doing for us? And once you figure that out, you can determine, well, is it something we can just customize within Salesforce, or is it something that's just a hard stop if the platform doesn't support it, period? Maybe you're not happy with them as a vendor or whatever. I'm just picking on them because that was the first sort of service that came to mind. But, and then you build your new thing based on what you learn from that evaluation. And then, maybe you're going to look at alternatives. Well, make sure it checks off those boxes if those are really important things in terms of your growth. And then you go and actually do it and test it and, make sure it works the way you want. And some of it's like, and I see this happens pretty regular. It's like, you can pretty much do anything given enough time and money. But most people don't have unlimited budgets and unlimited time frames. And so you sometimes have to accept some compromise in terms of like, okay, if we want to use this tool, it can do 90% of what we want it to do. We can push it another 5 or 10%, 5 or 8% of the way with some customization and some custom development. But there's always going to be that 2 or 3% that's not quite there. Or in order to get to that 100% mark, it's going to just cost too much money and just have to live without it. Or sometimes just like maybe there's a bit of a manual process that needs to happen. I quite often, you can't automate everything. And sometimes you just have to like kick, those 5 or 6% of cases over to a human being and use their intelligence and experience to sort of go through the process, contact the customer directly, figure it out, and then go from there instead of trying to automate it, because it would just take forever to automate the process.
It's an excellent point. And I think it has actually a side benefit of that's sometimes where innovation comes from. When you have put somebody down into, having to do a process, let's say, most of the email addresses that come in, they're workable, but some aren't. Somebody comes out and they have to review those one by one. I find sometimes new ideas come out of that, where if they just had it in a system and it's like run silent, run deep, nobody's really thinking about maybe making the customer experience better, or here's an opportunity to upsell them. Sometimes you just need to slow things down a bit to let what humans are good at, right? We're kind of, compared to computers, we're relatively dumb and we're relatively slow, but we have some things that we can really do to think about that the computer's never going to see.
No, and I ran into a situation where I have a client trying to parse a very large list, probably about 10,000 users, and in order to sort of remove spam accounts and things like that, just to clean things up. And they said, "Well, can you do this?" And I said, "Well, it's possible, but like honestly, like just do a test. Like sit someone down for an hour and see how many people they can go through manually and eyeball it." Like, and it's like, well, actually, yeah, like we could probably have 2 people do this in like a week, and clean the data up dramatically. Whereas it would take months, and you wouldn't even get the same results at the end of the day. And so, that's what they ended up doing. I talked myself out of a contract that probably would have been very frustrating to work on, and it's fine. But like, and I'm okay with that because that client will come back to me because like I gave them, I feel, good advice
Yep.
and save them time and money on that. And so when they actually do have a problem that I can help them with, hopefully they'll come back and see me. And it said like technology can solve a lot of problems, and as you mentioned, it can certainly speed things up a lot, but it also can on the other side, it can speed up making mistakes. So nothing is more efficient than sending out 100,000 bad emails to somebody, and we've all seen it. Dear blank
Yep.
or whatever, where they try to personalize
Yep.
it, and the or worse yet, some funny quote unquote test data ends up in an email type thing. And so we always have to temper like the technology side of it with, again, the business side, and there's sort of obviously a human side, which is your customers who are receiving these things. They want to feel special, and so I've seen this where people spend a lot of time and effort sort of automating processes, but it doesn't necessarily always lead to the result they want because they're, again, not focused on what the goal is. They're just looking at technology or automation for technology and automation's sake, not as a goal to drive customer interaction and a better experience for their customers.
Yeah, no, it's a perfect point to end on. There are things, if we kind of look in a whole 360, I bet those times where we realize that if we just use something manual or we apply common sense to the problem, that'll solve it. And lo and behold, somewhere else we'll notice another process that we've been doing manually probably longer than we should have, and it could be automated. So yeah, I like that idea of just use common sense. Don't fixate on looking for everything. There will be things that just surface and you'll just notice, and you will hopefully be able to know which parts of the stack you can bring more computing power for, and which ones you can just leave well enough alone. Dave, how do people who want to find out more about what you do get in touch with you?
Oh, I mean, I'll be honest, I'm a web developer. I don't even have my own website. So almost all my work is referral. So I guess you have to know somebody and go from there. You can obviously reach me at dave@brandbot.ca.
Yep.
That's probably the best way to reach out. But I said I'm a very lazy salesperson. And I said I've been very fortunate that almost all my business comes from referral work. So if you need to find me, you'll have to find somebody who knows me.
And it may not be a brand site, but you, of course, are on Twitter a fair bit. So what's your Twitter account?
Oh, I'm at all_caps on Twitter, and I'm there, for better or worse, I guess.
So it's the I'll forewarn people. You're just getting Dave, right? It's not necessarily the things that Dave would say for building business. It wouldn't necessarily be only for personal. It's like a little bit of everything.
Well, I mean, I've been freelancing now since 2008. And, Twitter sort of started for me as the water cooler. It's what kept me sane while working at home and building business. And of course, through COVID and other things. So yeah, you're getting a raw, unfiltered version of me.
That's great. All right. Well, Dave, thanks very much for spending time. And to the listener, thank you for listening to us talk about this stuff. I hope you found it useful. And if you did, I encourage you to share it with somebody who you think is grappling with how to use their marketing stack. And hopefully some of the advice that they heard today will help them. And once again, thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Follow the show on Twitter @Funnel Reboot. If you like what you have heard today, please consider leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts.